So I'd like to give you a little back history of how I fell into junk removal. I enlisted into the U.S. Army at the age of 18 years old, and I had a really awesome recruiter who was really great with words and presentations. He told me about this awesome unit in the U.S. Army, and they were called the infantry. And and he showed me a video of soldiers in Alaska jumping out of helicopters wearing overwhites. And we're talking late 80s or so. So back then, we were all into Star Wars. So when I saw those soldiers jumping out of the helicopters in overwhites in the snow, stormtroopers came to mind. And I said, that's probably for me right there. So I ended up joining the infantry, spent 16 years in the infantry. And in 2012, I deployed to Afghanistan. I was medevac out of Afghanistan during my 11th month on tour. I was then sent to Fort Bliss, Texas, at the Warrior Transition Battalion for our Marines. The Marines call it Wounded Warrior Barracks. And then from there, I continued home care. But during those first couple of years that I was no longer serving, I found myself falling deeper and deeper into a funk, if you will. At that particular time, I had been home from Afghanistan about a year and a half. My wife was offered a really fantastic opportunity working at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. So we uprooted and moved cross country from the Los Angeles, California area to Northern Virginia. Within 3 months of us landing here in Virginia, my wife gave birth. She spent a few months home on maternity leave, but then had to return to work. So here I am, about a year and a half to 2 years out of the military, still dealing with getting better and so forth. And during the day, I'm charged with taking care of my newborn, knew nothing about how to raise kids, but found myself leading and developing my son. Throughout the day, it's just my son and I. My wife would return home from work. And at that point, I would literally hand off my newborn to her, and I would disappear into the basement. And I would begin my ritual of drowning my sorrows in despair. I was no longer part of that brotherhood, that infantry lifestyle, and I just couldn't adopt to civilian society. But luckily, my neighbor at the time was a Marine, and she was being reassigned, and she knew I had a truck and a trailer, and asked if I wouldn't mind taking some stuff for her to the landfill. So I did. And she insisted on paying me for it. And when she paid me, I had an epiphany. I thought that if I could somehow turn this into a business, I would be able to once again reconnect with my veteran brothers and sisters through providing this service. Like you mentioned, right outside of the main gate of Quantico, there are a ton of Marines right outside of the main gate living in Stafford and the surrounding area. So I had the opportunity to, as a junk hauler, to network, to fellowship, and just be among my veteran brothers and sisters. And every time I provided junk removal service as a business to a fellow veteran, I began to feel whole again. And I realized that if I was so lost in the beginning in dealing with PTSD, that there were probably other soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine who were dealing with the same issues as well. It was the feeling of not fitting in. It was dealing with survivor's guilt. It was the feeling of just being disconnected from my tribe. And through necessity, I created this mechanism by which I was able to be around those individuals, those service members that I loved being around. So along my junk removal journey, I developed a need to mentor. So I began producing videos, just taking my camera along while I'm doing a junk removal job with the hope that I would be able to reach other veterans out there and show them that maybe they don't have any skills, but that shouldn't prevent them from pursuing a business. be it junk removal or anything else. Really a way to encourage them, but by the same token, feed my need of mentoring and connecting with other individuals. So I began to create a following. My number of subscribers began to increase dramatically. But the amazing thing is that veterans began reaching out either by telephone or email and asking if I was accepting new franchisees. I didn't know what franchising was.
Joe, had you gotten incorporated by this point as a business?
No, I had not. It was okay. Just my 2014 Toyota Tacoma and a little rickety landscape trailer. I've always been a big believer in starting with what you have.
I love it.
I hadn't incorporated yet, but at that point, I began kind of playing with the idea of, maybe this is my calling. Maybe my reason for being here is to help other veterans heal like I've healed through business ownership. So I coined a term. The term I coined was junk removal therapy. And it's that feeling that I got when I'm driving away from a customer's home, knowing that I provided the absolute best service that I can, and feeling fulfilled, feeling like I'm being productive again, and really, once again, feeling like I'm able to provide for my family and contribute to the family unit. At that point, we also began fielding calls from first responders like firefighters, law enforcement officers, and EMTs. So we decided to rebrand as Troops Haul Junk, because originally Vets Haul Junk, which is the business that I launched, I wanted it to be strictly a veteran thing, only vets. This was going to be our thing. We could bond with one another, connect with one another, and just be around those other individuals who understood where we come from, in a manner of speaking. But often, first responders experience those types of bonds and that camaraderie themselves, and they may spend a career serving on the front lines in their towns and cities. But when they leave law enforcement or fire service or what have you, they also find themselves at times lost and still craving that camaraderie that we all once experienced while serving. From there, we created Troops Haul Junk, which is, we believe, to my knowledge, the very first junk removal franchise opportunity exclusive to veterans and first responders. This is something for us. And at the present, we have our first franchise in South Charlotte, North Carolina. We have 2 corporate-owned stores here in Stafford, Virginia, and the other in Statesville, North Carolina, which is my business partner, Chris Benson, and CEO, who is also a combat vet. And when he returned, his story is very similar to mine. He couldn't quite find his place in society. He had no real true marketable skills. So he launched a landscaping company. That wasn't cutting it. That wasn't feeding the family. He happened upon some of my videos on YouTube, reached out. We began a partnership and eventually launched Troops Haul Junk as a franchise. And at present, we're also developing our 4th franchise location in Asheville, North Carolina, sir. So a franchise system, for those of our listeners who don't know, there's usually a corporate office. Typically, that's where the founders and admin and support staff and so forth are located. And then the individual franchise locations are people like my U.S. Navy CB, Shannon Gentry in South Charlotte, North Carolina, who is interested in a business, but perhaps not a business where he has to develop everything himself, the infrastructure, he has to learn certain talents like marketing and so forth. So in essence, franchising, I like to say, is a ready-made business with built-in systems, infrastructure, and mentorship. But yes, they are individually owned locations, which pay a royalty to the organization. I was on a mission, sir. I like to say, even before I knew what my mission was. But, us veterans are resourceful and we're innovative. And I truly needed a way to create something that could make me feel whole again. And I had determined that though I know I was no longer serving in the military or on active duty, I could still be around those individuals that I adored.
Now, explain to us this conference you went to where you met Faizun. What was your purpose in going to that franchise conference?
We wanted to engage with veterans. And really, we understood that this Washington, D.C. Franchise Expo was not a veteran-specific event, but we were hoping there would be veterans there. At our stage, we're considered an emerging franchise, under 50 franchise locations, 50 units. So at this point, we have to be extremely aggressive to be able to get the word out. So we shout it from the rooftops. We utilize the 5-foot rule. Typically, anyone within 5 feet, whether we're in the supermarket line or at the DMV, everyone's going to know what we do. So we were hoping to meet veterans there, but by the same token, I wanted to reach out and have individual engagements with other franchise owners who were there, just to kind of find out
Great
tips, techniques, what we were doing wrong, what we could do better, what they were doing that maybe we could utilize, kind of just researching intelligence, to put it in military terms, gathering intelligence. I often say that you can put two veterans who've never met into a room, and within 5 minutes, we're going to find common ground because we are cut from the same cloth. Many of us have had the same experiences, maybe even deployed to the same area in a combat zone. So there's that automatic brotherhood and camaraderie, not to mention the organizational skills, sometimes the managerial experience, like you've said. So where other franchises or other businesses, maybe not even franchise related, find it difficult to train employees, turnover is significant. We don't have that issue. Now, though our vetting process is very in-depth, we also understand that not every veteran is for us now, but we take great pride in the fact that when we do speak to, especially veterans, they may be coming to the table with the wish to be a franchisee and not much more. Maybe their credit is not so great, but we are prideful that we can tell them perhaps not now, but take a step back, maybe work on your credit, maybe work on your this or that, and come back to us when you've invested in yourself just a little more. And let's talk once again. You can't explain to someone to embrace the suck for our veterans. But when you've embraced the suck, it's very easy to bond with another individual who's also been part of that suck as well. So we all have common ground.
Could you tell us how much you and your business utilizes social media?
A tremendous amount. From the beginning, like I mentioned earlier, I began producing videos chronicling my daily junk removal journey. And part of that, like I said earlier, was the fact that I needed to mentor. But it wasn't completely unselfish, because I know that YouTube is the world's largest search engine. So knowing that YouTube is the world's largest search engine, I decided to look at what everyone else was doing and do the complete opposite. So I began producing almost a video a day. I guess right now I probably have close to 600 or 700 videos. Some of them talk about mentorship, some talk about tips on the job, but I began using social media early on very extensively, and that's helped us grow. It doesn't cost anything.
What do you have to type in to search for that?
You could type in Troops Haul Junk. That's our new channel that we're migrating to. We have quite a few videos there, but the bigger channel is Vets Haul Junk.
Okay.
And you could type that in on YouTube and you'll see all of the videos that I produced over time.